The making of the King James Bible is documented in a variety of sources that allow us to follow its history from the moment of its conception in January 1604 to its final revision in 1610. In April 1603, the Puritan ministers who felt that the Reformation had not gone far enough in Tudor England presented to James I a document said to bear 1,000 signatures and hence known as the Millenary Petition. They were expressing their dissatisfaction with the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic practices still used in its ritual or mentioned in its prayer book. James responded by summoning to his Hampton Court palace the elite of the established church and 4 scholarly moderate Puritans. A 3-day-long conference, known as the Hampton Court Conference, was held on January 14, 16, and 18, 1604. The same year, William Barlow, the Dean of Chester, published the only official account of its proceedings. According to Barlow, on the second day of the conference, John Reynolds unexpectedly asked the king that there may be a new translation of the Bible, arguing that the Bibles published during the reigns of Henry VIII and Edward VI were full of mistakes and misrepresented the original text. James assented to his proposal, but he also declared his contempt for the Geneva Bible and dismissed it as the worst of all English translations. The King James Bible was conceived in that fateful instant. Some of the bishops and most of the scholars summoned to Hampton Court were going to be its translators. For the king, the new translation was an important means to consolidate religious unity and peace through the realm. The facsimile edition of Barlow's account is open to page 45, showing the first mention of a new translation. In 1631, James' son and heir, Charles I, authorized the publication of a verse translation of the Psalms attributed to his late dear father, and allowed the text to be sung in all churches. The extent of King James' contribution to the 1631 text is hard to determine, but it appears that most of the work was done by William Alexander, a Scottish poet who had followed the king to London after 1603 and was made Earl of Stirling in 1614. Ironically, the Bible associated with King James does not depict the monarch on its title page, while the Great Bible has an image of Henry VIII and the Bishop's Bible contains a portrait of Queen Elizabeth. James' portrait was included instead in this posthumous edition of the Psalms. On its title page shown here, King James, in full regalia, faces the reader, while to his right, King David, his counterpart, is holding his harp and looking upwards for divine inspiration. Richard Bancroft attended the Hampton Court Conference in January 1604 as Bishop of London. 10 months later, in November 1604, he was enthroned Archbishop of Canterbury. During the conference, he opposed strongly the idea of a new translation of the Bible, but once the king approved it, he worked relentlessly to gather a team of translators and organize their work. To coordinate the work of this huge team of scholars, Bancroft issued a set of written instructions that define some general principles and describe specific procedures. The document, known through 4 slightly different manuscript copies, can be considered the first handbook for Bible translators. The first of the rules given to the translators instructed them to follow the wording of the bishop's Bible as closely as possible and alter it only in the interest of conformity to the original Hebrew and Greek texts. The edition they used was the 1602 folio printed by Richard Barker. The printer supplied for the translators 40 unbound copies of this folio. The title page shown here includes the tetragrammaton, the 4 Hebrew letter transcribes as YHWH, that form the proper name of God. Also present is a slain lamb on the altar, symbol of Christ's sacrifice, the 4 evangelists, the 10th of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 apostles. Barker used this image as the secondary title page in some copies of the first edition of the King James Bible. In addition to the Bishop's Bible and earlier English translations, the translators used all the standard tools of their trade, including printed editions of the Hebrew Bible and Greek New Testament, an assortment of grammars and dictionaries, and a variety of Bible translations into Latin, Syriac, and the major languages of Europe. Printing in Hebrew characters started in the 1470s. By the end of the 15th century, Jewish printers had produced 36 editions of the Hebrew Bible issued in its entirety or in separate parts. Daniel Bomberg was the first Christian publisher of Hebrew books. His first Hebrew Bible, printed in Venice in 1517-1518 and edited by Felix Pratensis, a converted Jew, was not well received in the Jewish communities. For his second edition of the Bible, Bomberg enlisted the help of his proofreader, Jacob ben Hayim. The editor revised the 1517 text using Sephardic manuscripts, wrote a detailed introduction, and added to the standard rabbinic commentaries a clearly edited version of the Masorah. The text of Bomberg's second Biblia Rabbinica soon came to be considered the standard Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible and was the source of countless editions until the early 20th century. The translators of the King James Bible used editions of the Hebrew Bible that derived from Bomberg's text. Like all their contemporaries, the Jacobean translators read the Greek New Testament in printed editions based on late Byzantine manuscripts. The Greek text they followed most frequently was the one edited by Théodore de Bèze, known as Beza. By the 1630s, this text was being reprinted throughout Western Europe and was generally known as the Textus Receptus, the received text. Beza, one of the most learned theologians of his time, became the leader of the Swiss Reformed Church after Calvin's death in 1564. His monumental last edition of the Greek New Testament, shown here, includes in 3 parallel columns the Greek text, his own Latin translation, and the standard Latin text of the Vulgate. Cross-references and short explanatory notes are printed in the margin, while an ample and quite erudite commentary is placed at the bottom of the page. The text shown here is Romans 5, verses 10 through 13. Beza fills almost completely 2 folio pages while explaining only 6 verses of the standard Greek text. The remarks on the words he translated as in quo homine, in whom, at the end of Romans 5:12, are quoted literally in the notes of translator John Boyce. They are added in the 4th edition only and are the source of the marginal note in the 1611 English text.